Hello fellow Ashenone, I'm Radek. Today we will talk about the Kingdom of Lothric, the royal family and the society it is based on. Lothric is the geographical center of Dark Souls 3's events, a kingdom surrounded by the convolution of the lands of the previous Lords of Cinder. The metaphysical conglomeration of different nations and time periods converging around the kiln of the First Flame, cradle of all civilizations. Lothric is not only that, it is also the name of its prince, the perfect monarch conceived and born to continue the Lords of Cinder's heritage, the next in line to link the fire once more. But he didn't show up when the world needed him the most. Why? And what happened to its kingdom? Let's proceed with order, as this journey is more complex and clouded than many others. Therefore, I invite you to enjoy this video as my personal view and analysis on the matter. New interpretations will rise over time, erasing my theories or perhaps adding new evidence to it. Lothric's society is well structured and mirrors its landform. It is the legacy of past civilizations. Gods, sorcerers, heroes and men all find a place in this kingdom. Everything orbs around the royal family and the three pillars of Lothric, the priestess, the scholars and the knights. That of the priestess is the religious mediator class of Lothric. This pillar is based on the faith in the paladins and in the godly royal family. It is guided by High Priestess Emma, wet nurse of Prince Lothric. In Lothric, the High Priestess has long been considered one of the three pillars of the king's rule. The High Priestess also served as the prince's wet nurse. The knights served as the kingdom's defenders. From their weapons we know they were a celebrated force equipped for dragon hunting. Ultra Greatsword of the venerable Knights of Lothric, imbued with the strength of lightning, the trademark of dragon hunting. Eventually they started taming the drakes to use them instead for defense purposes. The Knights of Lothric with their drakes once crushed anything that threatened their shores. Of course, that was a long time ago. The scholars are arguably the most interesting pillar of Lothric, as they were deeply connected to the royal family, while their work is murky and intriguing at the same time. We know from the Scholars' Ring that they were the masters of the Grand Archives, home to immense but dangerous knowledge, and therefore jealously guarded. Only few have been granted access to it. The scholars were guided by their first, who was Prince Lothric's private mentor. High-ranking were also the Crystal Sages. The three Crystal Sages once served as spiritual guides to the scholars of the Grand Archives, and one went to ally with the Undead Legion. They are also Big Head Logan's legacy. Enormous head that completely obscures the face, belong to the twin gurus known as Crystal Sages. The pair are said to be successors to the Great Sage Logan, and this big head is a symbol of their pedigree. We know that these three forces were competing each other for power, and that's probably why the Knights and the Priestess allied at some point in time to counter the Scholars, which came in possession of the Archive's great potential. The Knight is one of the three pillars of Lothric, said to have strengthened ties with the High Priestess after the Scholars acquired the Grand Archives. Surprisingly, there was also a fourth, unofficial pillar, the Black Hand, Lothric's Hunters. The Hunters serve Lothric on the fringes and in the shadows. For generations, rulers of Lothric have relied especially upon the Black Hand Hunters to punish enemies in ways that the king's three pillars cannot. We know from the Black Hand armor that there are no more than 3 hunters. Black Hand was the title established to honor hunters who served successive generations of kings. To date, no more than 3 such individuals have borne this distinction. 2 of them are known: Gotthard, whose body can be found at the entrance of the archives holding one of its few keys, and Camui, Prince Lothric's bodyguard. Above them all was Lothric's royal family, consisting of King Osiris, his queen, and his sons Lorian, Lothric, Ocelot and Gertrude. We don't know much about the queen, other than she had obvious connections to Guinevere. We get this information from the Divine Blessing item. The Queen of Lothric, married to former King Osiris, was initially revered as a goddess of fertility and bounty. After giving birth to Ocelot, her youngest, she quietly disappeared. It's at this point important remembering that Dark Souls as a franchise is first written in Japanese and then translated into English. During this transition, the chance of losing some nuances in the meanings of the item descriptions is not impossible, far from it actually. And this most likely is one of those rare cases. According to Reddit user Dawn's Island, the original Japanese description specifies that the queen was compared to a goddess of fertility and bounty. Therefore, she probably was not said goddess. Still, her connections to Guinevere are undeniable, so perhaps she was her child or maiden. But at this point in time, it's hard to say which of the two options is correct. From the original Japanese, we also learned that her leaving Lothric was most likely voluntary, not forced. Which is strange, because from the Divine Blessing and the Hidden Blessing items, she seemed to be very close to Lothric's lower classes, thus making her voluntary disappearance a strong hint about the problems which later grew inside the royal family. Other than that, we don't know much more about her, thus keeping speculations about her identity alive. I, for example, like to believe she's Rosaria, as the latter bears some resemblance to Lorien and Lothric, possesses Guinevere's bountiful sunlight miracle, and one of her mangrubs can be found close to Gertrude, but perhaps this is better to be explained in another video. From the bountiful light miracle, we know she gave birth to a daughter, Gertrude. Miracle taught to the knights by Gertrude, holy maiden to the queen. Gradually restores a large amount of HP. The heavenly daughter is said to be the queen's child. She could be called a heavenly daughter because of her mother's connection to the ancient gods, though in fact the most likely reason for her title is due to an event which should later prove to have further divided the kingdom. At some point in time, Gertrude was allegedly visited by an angel. The queen's holy maiden, Gertrude, was visited by an angel, who revealed this tale to her. Despite losing both her sight and voice, she was determined to record the tale. Ordinary men cannot decipher her fragmentary scroll, nor comprehend how it became the foundation of the angelic faith in Lothric. This kick-started the rise of the angelic faith, which therefore was considered heretical by the Three Pillars as it proved to be a big threat to their power. Sure enough, their fears were well founded, as with the spread of the new credo, a civil war started between the high ranks of the society. A new groups of knights embraced the angelic faith, the Winged Knights. Armor of the Winged Knights, who swore themselves to the angels. Worship of the divine messengers was viewed as heresy in Lothric and unrecognized by any of the Three Pillars of rule. This is believed to be why Gertrude, the Heavenly Daughter, was imprisoned in the lofty cell of the Grand Archives. Speculations about the mentioned angel are risked, as other than Gertrude's miracle we know nothing about it. There's however a small hint that it might have to do something with the old gods. The fact that it is possible to find the Winged Knight set together with the Sacred Bloom Shield, an ancient way of white treasure, gives us the impression that this angel has connections to Gwyn. It is also possible that the pilgrim butterflies are a product of the angel. This is sustained not only by the fact that they are worshipped by a mass of undeads on the high walls, but also because one of the butterflies controls the old Dragon Slayer armor at the entrance of the Grand Archives, where the scholars had taken shelter from the spread of this powerful new faith. So Gertrude was imprisoned, most likely by a third Black Hand, as we find his ring at the location of her cage. Therefore the prince himself must have ordered to imprison her, his own sister. This might also be confirmed by the fact that it is possible to find feathers in both the throne room and in Gertrude's cage. The location of the latter is also concrete evidence on who profited from the situation. In fact, Gertrude's cage is at the top of the Grand Archives, and that's not an end in itself, as she was studied by the scholars. They used her chyme and added the power of crystals to create a sinful tool able to cast both miracles and sorceries. A sacred chyme, once the possession of Gertrude, the Heavenly Daughter, and defied by the scholars of the Grand Archives. The power of the crystals granted the scholars a degree of success. In this case, the work enabled this chyme to be suitable for casting both miracles and sorceries. Even though most of the causes are still unclear, we have painted a hopeless and frightful picture of Lothric. Once a majestic, noble and advanced kingdom, Lothric is all but a shadow of what it once was. Its streets are filled with dead bodies and cursed consumed undeads. The members of the Three Pillars are in hiding, if not dead, while the royal family is scattered, torn into pieces. How could King Osiris let this happen? Where is he while his country is tormented by civil war and insurrection? Sadly, his figure is but a clue of this crumbling. We can find him in what once was his garden, defaced and mutated in what closely resembles Sif the Scaleless, the pale and imperfect dragon. From his soul we get a glimpse on what brought him this far. Soul of Osiris, the consumed king. Osiris went mad trying to harness his royal blood for a greater purpose, leading him to the heretics of the Grand Archives, where he discovered the twisted worship of Sif the Pale Drake. He was obsessed by the desire of creating the perfect heir, the one worthy succeeding wing in the linking of fire. Prince Lothric was the first result of his endeavor. He was conceived as Lord of Cinder, but eventually things didn't happen as they were meant to be. Lothric was born in cursed and frail. The prince, destined to be a Lord of Cinder, was cherished by the royal family despite being born into illness, a frail and shriveled child. His sweating clothes were made of aged, coarse cloth used in ancient prayer, and are all that he has ever worn. While his elder brother Lorien decided to share Lothric's curse to ease his venture, Osiris wasn't satisfied and his research on the perfect heir went on, eventually leading him to the Grand Archives. Here, the first scholar guided him towards Big Head Logan's research on Sif the Scaleless. Legendary dragon weapon associated with Sif the Pale Drake. Osiris, the consumed king, was infatuated with the search for moonlight, but in the end it never revealed itself to him. But instead of helping him in his quest, Sif's experiments drove him crazy, the same way Big Head Logan began to lose his sanity, which wasn't well received by his subjects. Ring of Osiris, former king of Lothric, reduces damage from backstabs. In his later years, Osiris became fascinated with dragons. After going mad, he was more commonly known as the Consume King. Many assassins were dispatched to his domain, but none returned. The Consume King ascribed his resilience to the divine protection of the dragon scale. Nonetheless, his research finally led him to Ocelot, his youngest. It's at this point that we find him in his garden, holding what looks like to be nothing, but given the fact that half-breeds like Priscilla are able to turn invisible, and the baby cries during the boss fight, Ocelot really might be there, in that very room. Still, at this point in time, Osiris isn't ruling the kingdom. His lack of lucidity bounded him to his research. The power seems to be in Lothric's hands, as he is sitting on the throne when we meet each other. Our conversation with him surprisingly tells us that, oppositely to what he was raised for, he has no intentions to link the fire. He wants to see the curse of the Lords of Cinder finally end. If we think back, it's likely that the one who made him change his mind was probably his mentor, the first of the scholars. We know from his sorcery that he doubted the linking of the fire and therefore passed on his hesitation to his pupil, Lothric. But why was the first of the scholars opposed to the linking of the fire? While exploring the Grand Archives, it's possible to find multiple times a very familiar looking statue representing a primordial serpent. Given the fact that there are only few important leading figures in the scholars' ranks, I think that the serpent was the first of the scholars, a wise figure as is confirmed by the clothes he wears, especially the tiny wings, symbol of wisdom in ancient mythology. I'm not sure which one of the serpents this one is, as his stopping the fire is a typical calf behavior. On the other hand, we know that he was already guiding the Sable Church in London. Well, actually it's not that important knowing its identity, as it is known that the serpent's ultimate will is unclear. Perhaps they don't even have one, but power is what they really seek. Still, the picture of Lothric we draw gives us the idea that all the chaos born in the kingdom ultimately well suited the first of the scholars, as weakening the royal family and the power pillars of the city allowed him to have direct undiscussed influence on Prince Lothric. The king went crazy over the archive's researches while the pillars fought over each other, and further split up with the spread of the angelic faith, which lets me think that the serpent might have embodied the role of the angel, as Gertrude was blinded by him so couldn't know anything about its real identity. The latter crisis also forced the queen to leave Lothric, putting her last hopes in some of the unkindled in the kingdom's untended graves, where she left her ashen Estus ring to help a chosen one to save one day her kingdom from the Age of Dark. All that is left is the prince, who by now is nothing more than a tool in the hands of his puppeteer, the first of the scholars. Thank you to those who made it through till the end of this video and watched it. I hope you really enjoyed it. If you did, then please leave some feedback and maybe tell me what I could still improve in this format, as it's still quite new, it's still in its youth, and a lot of things can be improved. Anyways, I also invite you to check out my other videos in case you didn't do, about Dark Souls 3's lore, one about the Abyss Watchers, and another one about Londor and the Usurpation of Fire ending. Hope to see you in the next one, and have a nice day, guys.